John Miller wiped sweat from his forehead as he stared at the official envelope on his kitchen table. The government seal in the corner made his stomach turn. He knew what was inside before he even opened it. After 3 years of waiting, wondering when they would come for him, the moment had finally arrived. With shaking hands, he tore open the envelope and pulled out the court summons. The paper confirmed his fears. He was being called to testify in the case against his former boss, Kash Patel. John had worked as Patel's assistant at the Department of Defense for 18 months. During that time, he had seen things, heard things, and filed things that the public was never meant to know about. The congressional investigation into intelligence leaks had been making headlines for weeks. Now it had reached Patel and, by extension, him. John walked to his bedroom closet and pulled out the small fireproof box he kept hidden behind old winter coats. Inside were copies of documents from his time working with Patel, his insurance policy. He never thought he would need to use them. He hoped he still wouldn't have to. Across town, in her spacious office overlooking the city, Judge Nancy Howard sipped coffee as she reviewed the Patel case file. At 58, Judge Howard had earned her reputation as one of the toughest judges on the federal bench. Her silver-streaked dark hair was pulled back in its usual tight bun. Her reading glasses perched on her nose as she flipped through pages of legal briefs. Another leak investigation, she muttered to herself. The past few years had seen a surge in such cases, with government officials from various agencies accused of sharing classified information with journalists or writing tell-all books without proper clearance. The Patel case seemed straightforward from the file. The former Defense Department official had made public statements about classified operations, citing sources he refused to name. A soft knock at her door interrupted her reading. Susan Bennett, her clerk for the past 5 years, entered with a fresh cup of coffee. "The Patel hearing starts in an hour, Judge," Susan reminded her, taking the empty cup and replacing it with the full one. "Thank you, Susan. This one's going to make headlines, isn't it?" Judge Howard said with a slight frown. "Already has. There's a line of reporters forming outside the courthouse." Judge Howard nodded. High-profile cases came with the territory. "Has the prosecution submitted any last-minute filings?" "No, but Mr. Patel's attorney delivered this 15 minutes ago." Susan handed over a sealed envelope. Judge Howard opened it and scanned the contents. It was a motion to dismiss, citing executive privilege. She had expected as much, but the argument seemed weak. She placed it on top of her file. "Nothing surprising here. Let's proceed as scheduled." As Susan left, Judge Howard didn't know that her own name was about to become central to this case in ways she couldn't imagine. John Miller arrived at the courthouse 30 minutes early. The steps were already crowded with news crews and protesters, holding signs with slogans like "Truth is not treason" and "Protect whistleblowers." He kept his head down and slipped in through a side entrance he knew about from previous visits. In the corridor outside courtroom 3, John spotted a familiar face, Richard Doyle, Patel's attorney. Doyle was tall and lean, with a reputation for aggressive defense strategies. He was talking in hushed tones with Patel himself. Kash Patel looked calmer than John expected. For a man facing potential contempt charges and worse, he seemed almost confident. When Patel noticed John, he gave a small nod of recognition but didn't approach. They had agreed months ago to maintain distance in public. On the opposite side of the hallway stood Alice Gardner, the government prosecutor. She was reviewing notes with her team, occasionally glancing toward Patel with narrowed eyes. John had heard stories about Gardner. She had never lost a case involving national security. Her dark suit and stern expression matched her reputation. John found a seat at the back of the courtroom. He watched as it filled with journalists, legal observers, and curious members of the public. The tension in the air was palpable. At exactly 10 a.m., the bailiff called for all to rise as Judge Howard entered. She took her place at the bench, her expression giving away nothing of her thoughts. "Be seated," she said, her voice firm and clear. "We are here in the matter of United States versus Kash Patel. Is the prosecution ready to proceed?" Alice Gardner stood. "Yes, Your Honor." "And the defense?" Richard Doyle rose from his seat. Ready, Your Honor. Judge Howard looked down at the papers before her. I've reviewed your motion to dismiss, Mr. Doyle. It's denied. The claim of executive privilege is not applicable in this instance, as the information in question was not shared. With Mr. Patel in his capacity as a direct advisor to the President, Doyle's face remained neutral, but John could see the slight tightening around his eyes. That had been their first line of defense. Ms. Gardner, you may present the government's case, Judge Howard continued. Gardner approached the podium. Thank you, Your Honor. The government's case is straightforward. Mr. Patel, in his recent book and in no fewer than 15 television interviews, has made specific claims about classified intelligence operations. When questioned about his sources, he has refused to identify them, claiming they would face retaliation. However, the law is clear. Mr. Patel signed multiple non-disclosure agreements. He was not authorized to share this information, regardless of how he obtained it. The prosecutor turned to face Patel directly. The government demands that Mr. Patel reveal his sources so that the full extent of the security breach can be assessed and contained. If he refuses, we ask that he be held in contempt and that his book profits be seized as they derive from illegal disclosure of classified information. Judge Howard nodded. Mr. Doyle, your opening statement? Doyle stood and buttoned his suit jacket. Your Honor, my client has served this country faithfully for many years in positions requiring the highest security clearances. He understands the importance of national security better than most. The information he has shared in his book and interviews was carefully vetted to ensure it would not compromise ongoing operations or put individuals at risk. He paced slowly in front of the bench. Mr. Patel's book underwent pre-publication review as required. If there were specific classified items the government felt should not be included, they had ample opportunity to flag them during that process. As for his sources, Doyle continued, Mr. Patel is protecting them from political retaliation, not legal consequences. These individuals followed proper channels to raise concerns about potentially illegal activities within their agencies. Their identities should remain confidential, just as we protect whistleblowers in other contexts. Judge Howard's expression remained neutral, but John thought he detected a hint of skepticism in her eyes. Thank you, Mr. Doyle. The government may call its first witness. Gardner called to the stand Frank Thompson, the official who had overseen the pre-publication review of Patel's book. Thompson, a thin man with thinning hair and thick glasses, testified that while the book had indeed been submitted for review, Patel had made substantial changes after receiving conditional approval. The final published version contained information that was not in the manuscript we reviewed, Thompson stated firmly. When it was Doyle's turn to cross-examine, he pushed Thompson hard. Isn't it true that your office took over 6 months to review the manuscript, far longer than the 30 days specified in the regulations? Thompson shifted uncomfortably. We had a backlog of submissions. And isn't it also true that when you finally responded, you flagged passages that contained information already publicly available in newspaper articles? We may have been overly cautious in some instances. John watched the back and forth with growing anxiety. He knew what was coming next, and he wasn't sure how Judge Howard would react. After Thompson stepped down, Gardner called Patel himself to the stand. He was sworn in, his right hand raised solemnly as he promised to tell the truth. Gardner wasted no time. Mr. Patel, in Chapter 7 of your book, you describe a classified intelligence operation in detail. Who gave you that information? Patel looked directly at the judge, not the prosecutor. With respect, I cannot answer that question. Mr. Patel, you are under oath, Judge Howard reminded him sternly. I understand, Your Honor. But I have another answer. Patel reached into his briefcase and pulled out a document with a red declassified stamp across its top. I'd like to submit this into evidence. Gardner rushed forward. Objection. The defense has not provided this document during discovery. It was only declassified yesterday, Doyle interjected. Judge Howard held out her hand. Let me see this document. As the bailiff brought it to her, John held his breath. He knew what was in that memo. He had been the one who found it buried. in the department's digital archives. Judge Howard's eyes widened slightly as she scanned the document. There on the distribution list of a highly sensitive intelligence memo was her own name, Judge Nancy Howard, from her time at the Justice Department before her appointment to the federal bench. The courtroom fell silent as everyone watched the judge's face. For the first time since the hearing began, her composure slipped. The courtroom remained silent as Judge Howard stared at the document in her hands. Her name was there, clear as day, on the distribution list of a classified intelligence memo that was now stamped declassified. She could feel every eye in the room on her, waiting for her reaction. With practiced control, Judge Howard kept her face neutral even as her mind raced. She had worked at the Justice Department for nearly a decade before her appointment to the federal bench, but she had no memory of ever seeing this particular memo. "The court will recess for 1 hour," she announced, her voice steady despite her inner turmoil. "Counselors in my chambers. Now." As Judge Howard stood, the courtroom erupted in whispers. Reporters rushed out to file updates. John Miller remained in his seat, watching Patel and Doyle exchange a quick look of satisfaction. This was exactly what they had planned. In her chambers, Judge Howard placed the document on her desk as Gardner and Doyle entered, followed by Patel. She closed the door firmly behind them. "Explain this," she said to Patel, pointing at the memo. "Your Honor, this document shows that you were on the distribution list for information about the very operation I discussed in my book," Patel replied calmly. "It was declassified through proper channels yesterday." Gardner stepped forward. "Judge, this is clearly a stunt to force your recusal. The timing is too convenient." "Is it?" Doyle countered. "Or does it simply demonstrate that the government's position is hypocritical? They accuse my client of revealing classified information, yet here is proof that Judge Howard herself had access to this same information." Judge Howard held up her hand to stop them. "Mr. Patel, are you suggesting I leaked this information to you?" "No, Your Honor," Patel said. "I'm simply establishing that this information was more widely distributed than the prosecution claims. The government is trying to punish me for discussing matters that numerous officials, including yourself, were briefed on." Judge Howard's eyes narrowed. "I have no recollection of ever seeing this memo." "With respect, Judge," Doyle interjected, "whether you read it or not is beside the point. The fact that you were on the distribution list demonstrates that this information was not as tightly controlled as the government now claims." Gardner's face flushed with anger. "This is outrageous. Being on a distribution list doesn't mean Judge Howard actually received or read the document. Many officials are included on such lists as a matter of protocol. Then perhaps," Doyle suggested, "the same benefit of the doubt should be extended to others who may have shared information with my client." Judge Howard sat down at her desk, trying to recall anything about this memo. The date on it was from 6 years ago during a particularly busy period at Justice. She had been overseeing dozens of national security cases. "I need to review this situation," she said finally. "We will reconvene in 1 hour. Until then, this document is sealed. No one discusses it outside this room, understood?" All three nodded, though Doyle's smile suggested he knew the damage was already done. As they left her chambers, Judge Howard picked up her phone and dialed a number she hadn't used in years. Outside in the hallway, John Miller watched as Patel and Doyle emerged from the judge's chambers. They walked past him without acknowledgement, but John could tell from their body language that the meeting had gone as expected. He slipped away to a quiet corner and took out his phone. "It's happening exactly like you said it would," he said, quietly when his call was answered. Patel showed her the memo. "And her reaction?" asked the voice on the other end. "She called a recess. They were in her chambers for about 10 minutes. Good, stay close. This is just the beginning." John ended the call and tucked his phone away. He had chosen his side in this fight long ago, but sometimes he wondered if he had made the right choice. In a small coffee shop across from the courthouse, Peter Collins sipped his third espresso of the day while typing furiously on his laptop. As a journalist for the Washington Examiner, he had covered dozens of government leak cases, but none had taken such a dramatic turn so quickly. "Judge and Patel case linked to classified memo at center of controversy," he typed as his headline. His editor would love this. Peter had cultivated sources in both the Justice Department and defense circles for years, but even he hadn't seen this coming. A judge potentially implicated in her own trial was the kind of story that could make a career. His phone buzzed with a text. "Check your email. More background on Howard." The sender was listed only as Source 2. Peter quickly opened his email on his laptop and found a message with several attachments. Old Justice. Department press releases and personnel announcements showing that Judge Howard had been part of a task force on intelligence oversight during the exact period covered by the memo. This was getting better by the minute. Peter added the new information to his story and hit send. His editor would probably have questions, but the basics were too good to sit on. Back in her chambers, Judge Howard was on the phone with William Grant, her former supervisor at Justice. "Bill, I need to know the truth. Was I actually briefed on this operation?" she asked urgently. There was a pause on the line. "Nancy, you were technically part of the oversight group, but that particular operation was compartmentalized. Your name was added to certain distribution lists as a matter of protocol. So I never saw this memo?" "Almost certainly not. It would have been held in a secure reading room, and according to our access logs, you never checked it out." Judge Howard felt a wave of relief. "Can you send me those logs? I need to establish that I had no actual knowledge of this information." "I'll see what I can do, but Nancy..." Bill hesitated. "This puts you in a difficult position. Even if you never read the memo, the appearance of a conflict is there." "I know," she replied grimly, "but I won't be manipulated into recusing myself if there's no actual conflict." After ending the call, Judge Howard sat at her desk, considering her options. The ethical choice seemed clear. Recusal would remove any question of bias. But something about the timing and the way Patel had produced the document made her suspicious. This felt like a tactic, not a coincidence. She picked up her phone again and called George Phillips, a fellow judge she trusted implicitly. "George, I need your advice on a recusal matter," she began, then explained the situation. "Tricky," he replied after listening. "If you recuse now, it looks like an admission of involvement. But if you stay on the case, your impartiality will be questioned." "Exactly my dilemma." "Who stands to benefit most from your recusal?" George asked. Judge Howard considered this. "The case would be reassigned. There's no telling who would get it, but Patel seems to think any other judge would be preferable to me." "Then ask yourself why. What makes your continued involvement particularly troublesome for him?" It was a good question. Judge Howard had a reputation for being tough, but fair in national security cases. She rarely ruled to suppress evidence on national security grounds when the government requested it, preferring to review such evidence herself in camera. "I think," she said slowly, "he believes a different judge might be more sympathetic to his executive privilege claims." "Then perhaps you should consider a third option," George suggested. "Something unexpected." As the hour recess neared its end, Alice Gardner paced in a small conference room provided for the prosecution team. Her two assistants watched her nervously. "This is a deliberate attempt to force a recusal," she said angrily. "They're forum shopping, plain and simple." "What if she does recuse?" asked Sam Porter, her youngest assistant. "Who would get the case?" "It would be random assignment, but this district has several judges who are more deferential to executive privilege claims," Gardner replied. "Which is exactly what Patel wants." "Can we oppose a recusal?" asked Linda Ortiz, her other assistant. Gardner stopped pacing. "Not directly, it's the judge's decision, but we can make it clear that we believe this is a tactical maneuver without merit." When the bailiff called the court back into session, the gallery was even more packed than before. News of the dramatic development had spread, drawing additional reporters and spectators. John Miller noticed several new faces that he recognized from Justice Department circles. Word was traveling fast. Judge Howard entered and took her seat at the bench. Her face revealed nothing of the turmoil of the past hour. "Before we proceed, I wish to address the document presented by Mr. Patel," she began. The courtroom fell completely silent. I have reviewed the document and consulted with appropriate officials at the Justice Department. While my name does appear on the distribution list for this memo, I have confirmed that I never accessed nor was briefed on its contents. She looked directly at Patel. Being on a distribution list is not the same as having actual knowledge of a document's contents, as I'm sure Mr. Patel is well aware from his time in government service. Gardner allowed herself a small smile. It appeared the judge was not backing down. However, Judge Howard continued, to ensure that there is not even the appearance of impropriety in these proceedings, I am taking an unusual step. Both legal, teams tensed waiting for the recusal announcement. I am requesting that Judge Henry Taylor join me in a dual bench arrangement for the remainder of this case. All major rulings will be made jointly. Judge Howard walked quickly to her car in the underground parking garage, her footsteps echoing against the concrete walls. The day's events had left her shaken, though she had been careful not to show it in the courtroom. As she reached for her car door, she noticed a manila envelope tucked under her windshield wiper. Her name was written on it in block letters. She looked around the dimly lit garage but saw no one. With cautious fingers, she opened the envelope and pulled out a single sheet of paper. It was a photocopy of an old sign-in sheet from a secure reading room at the Justice Department. Her signature was there, dated the same day as the memo Patel had presented in court. Beneath the photocopy, someone had written, "You did see it. Memory failing or lying under oath." Judge Howard's hand trembled slightly. She didn't remember signing the sheet, didn't remember reading that memo, but here was evidence suggesting otherwise. She quickly got into her car, locked the doors, and called George Phillips again. "Someone's trying to intimidate me," she told him after explaining about the envelope. "This goes beyond courtroom tactics. You need to report this to security," George advised. "And Nancy, you need to search your records. If you did access that reading room, there might be notes, calendar entries, something to help you remember. I've already looked." "There's nothing," she replied. "George, what if my memory is wrong? What if I did read it and simply forgot?" 6 years is a long time, and you reviewed hundreds of documents back then," he said gently. "But this changes things. If there's proof you had knowledge of the memo, staying on the case becomes more problematic." Judge Howard ended the call and sat in her car for several minutes thinking. Someone was going to great lengths to get her off this case. The question was, why? Across town, Kash Patel and Richard Doyle sat in a private dining room at an expensive steakhouse. They were not celebrating. "A dual bench arrangement?" Patel said, cutting into his rare steak with more force than necessary. "That wasn't the plan." Doyle sipped his bourbon. "Howard is smarter than we anticipated. This compromise keeps her involved while deflecting accusations of bias. Judge Taylor is a wild card," Patel worried. "His record on national security cases is mixed at best." "We still have options," Doyle assured him. "The memo was just the first step. Our source says Howard is already receiving the additional materials." Patel lowered his voice. "Is Miller still in position?" "Perfectly. No one suspects his role." Doyle's phone buzzed with a text message. He read it and smiled. "Speaking of which, our friend at the Washington Examiner just published his story online. By morning, the pressure on Howard will be intense." Meanwhile, John Miller sat at his kitchen table with a glass of whiskey and his laptop open to Peter Collins' article. The headline read, "Exclusive. Judge in high-profile national security case found to have prior knowledge of classified operations at issue." The article detailed the courtroom revelation and included quotes from sources close to the case suggesting that Judge Howard had not been truthful about her level of access to the intelligence. John closed his laptop and picked up his burner phone. He dialed a number from memory. "It's me," he said when the call connected. "Collins published the story. It's more aggressive than we discussed." "Good," replied the voice on the other end. "The more pressure, the better." She received the sign-in sheet. "Yes. Left exactly where you suggested." John hesitated. "This is going further than I'm comfortable with. She's a federal judge. Intimidating her could bring serious charges." "Getting cold feet, John?" The voice had an edge to it now. Remember why we're doing this. Patel is just the beginning. Once we establish that officials can speak freely about these operations, the whole house of cards comes down. I know, John said. But falsifying evidence, who said anything about falsifying? That sign-in sheet is genuine. Whether she remembers it or not is her problem. After ending the call, John poured himself another drink. He had joined this cause believing in government transparency, in exposing operations that crossed legal and ethical lines. But the methods were starting to trouble him. He wondered if he was now crossing lines of his own. Early the next morning, FBI agent Catherine Murphy badged her way into the Justice Department building. As part of the Bureau's Public Corruption Unit, she had been assigned to investigate potential tampering in the Patel case. The overnight developments had elevated the matter to high priority. Catherine was 38, with 10 years at the Bureau and a reputation for meticulous work. She had been monitoring the Patel case from the beginning, suspecting it might eventually cross into her territory. Political pressure and national security cases were a volatile mix. She took the elevator to the secure archives section in the basement. The archivist, an older man named Carl Jenkins, was expecting her. Agent Murphy, he greeted her. I pulled the visitor logs you requested. Thanks, Carl. I also need to see the chain of custody records for the memo that was declassified yesterday. Carl raised his eyebrows. That's been quite popular. Someone from the Inspector General's office was here at 6 a.m. asking for the same thing. That was interesting. Did they say why? No, but they were in a hurry. Almost forgot to sign out the materials properly. Catherine spent the next hour reviewing the records. The memo had followed standard declassification procedures, but the timing was suspicious. The request had been initiated just 3 days earlier and approved with unusual speed. Even more interesting was a notation that part of the original distribution list had been redacted before declassification. She took photos of the relevant pages with her bureau-issued phone. As she was preparing to leave, she noticed a name in the visitor log from the previous week, John Miller. According to the log, he had requested access to archived personnel records from the same time period as the memo. Catherine made a note to look into Miller. His name wasn't in the case file, but his timing was too convenient to ignore. Back at the courthouse, spectators lined up early for the day's proceedings. News of the dual bench arrangement had created even more interest. Camera crews set up outside, hoping to catch statements from the attorneys or glimpses of Patel. Inside, in a small conference room, Judge Howard met with Judge Henry Taylor before the hearing. Taylor was in his 60s with a full head of white hair and a reputation for being methodical and unflappable. Quite a situation you found yourself in, Nancy, he said after she had briefed him. Someone is going to extraordinary lengths to force me off this case, she replied, including leaving evidence on my car suggesting I'm either forgetful or lying. Taylor frowned. Have you reported that to security? Yes, though I doubt they'll find anything. Whoever did it was careful. The question is, why is this case so important? What's really at stake here? Judge Howard had been wondering the same thing. Officially, it's about Patel refusing to reveal his sources for classified information. But I'm starting to think there's something specific in that information that has people worried. Then perhaps we should look more closely at exactly what Patel revealed in his book, Taylor suggested. In the courtroom, Alice Gardner and her team prepared their materials for the day's hearing. Linda Ortiz leaned close to her boss. We've got a problem, she whispered. The Washington Examiner article quotes from internal prosecution memos. Someone on our team is leaking. Gardner's expression darkened. Find out who, now. At the defense table, Doyle reviewed his notes while Patel stared straight ahead, seemingly lost in thought. When John Miller entered the courtroom and took a seat in the back row, Patel gave no sign of recognition. A young woman slipped into the seat beside John. He was surprised when she leaned over and whispered, Mr. Miller, I'm Agent Catherine Murphy, FBI. I'd like to ask you a few questions after today's proceedings. John felt his heart rate spike, but kept his expression neutral. What about? Your recent visit to the Justice Department archives, she replied, softly. Among other things. Before John could respond, the bailiff called the court to order as Judges Howard and Taylor entered together. The unusual sight of two judges taking the bench side by side caused a buzz in the gallery. Judge Howard spoke first. Before we continue with yesterday's testimony, I wish to address a matter of concern. Last night, an attempt was made to intimidate the court through anonymous communication. This will not be tolerated. The FBI has been notified and an investigation is underway. She turned slightly toward Patel. Mr. Patel, you will retake the stand. And let me be very clear. Any further attempts to manipulate these proceedings will result in severe consequences. As Patel moved to the witness stand, John Miller felt Agent Murphy's eyes on him. He fought the urge to get up and leave. Too late for that now. Whatever happened next, he was caught in the middle of it. Judge Taylor leaned forward. Mr. Patel, yesterday you presented a declassified memo with Judge Howard's name on the distribution list. Today we'd like to discuss the specific operations mentioned in that memo, which you also wrote about in your book. Patel glanced at his attorney, who gave a slight nod. Of course, Your Honor, Patel replied. Though I should warn you, what I'm about to reveal goes far beyond one memo. It involves a systematic program of surveillance that targeted American citizens without proper warrants, all under the guise of national security. Patel sat up straight in the witness chair, ready to speak. The courtroom was completely silent, every person waiting for his next words. Before he could continue, Alice Gardner jumped to her feet. Objection, Your Honors. Mr. Patel is about to disclose information that remains classified despite the declassification of a single memo. Judge Taylor looked at Judge Howard, then back to Gardner. How can you know what he's about to disclose? Because the government is familiar with Mr. Patel's allegations, which have been reviewed and determined to contain still classified material, Gardner replied. Doyle stood up. The prosecution can't have it both ways, Your Honors. They can't claim Mr. Patel is revealing classified information, while simultaneously claiming they know exactly what he's going to say. If they know, then the information is already out there. The two judges conferred quietly for a moment. Judge Howard turned to Patel. Mr. Patel, we will allow you to proceed, but with caution. If the prosecution believes you are about to reveal currently classified information, they may object, and we will evaluate each objection individually. Patel nodded. Thank you, Your Honor. As I was saying, between 2016 and 2018, a program codenamed Lighthouse was operating within certain intelligence agencies. Its stated purpose was to monitor foreign influence on American political processes. Gardner remained seated but watched Patel like a hawk. In reality, Patel continued, Lighthouse cast a much wider net. It collected data on American citizens without proper visa warrants. The justification was always national security, but the targets included journalists, political campaign staff, and even members of Congress. Gardner stood again. Objection. This is precisely the classified information the government is concerned about. Is the government confirming the existence of this program? Judge Taylor asked. Gardner hesitated. The government neither confirms nor denies the existence of such a program, but maintains that Mr. Patel's characterization would be classified if accurate. Judge Taylor raised his eyebrows. That's quite a logical pretzel, Counselor. Overruled. Continue, Mr. Patel. From his seat in the back of the courtroom, John Miller watched nervously. This was exactly what their plan had been building toward, getting Patel on the record about Lighthouse in a way the government couldn't easily suppress. But with FBI agent Murphy sitting next to him, John felt trapped. He could feel her studying his reactions to Patel's testimony. Patel went on. The memo that was declassified yesterday was part of a quarterly report on Lighthouse activities. The distribution list included officials from Justice, FBI, and key congressional committees, people who were supposed to provide oversight. But many of them, including Judge Howard, were never actually shown the full contents. Judge Howard leaned forward. Mr. Patel, are you suggesting there was a deliberate effort to keep this information from those who should have seen it? Yes, Your Honor. The distribution lists were deliberately inflated to create the appearance of proper oversight, while the actual information was tightly controlled. That's why your name appears on the list, even though you may never have seen The document. It was plausible deniability for the program operators. In the gallery, Peter Collins typed furiously on his phone, capturing every word. This was explosive, far bigger than the initial story about Judge Howard's name on a memo. If Patel's claims were true, this was a major scandal involving illegal surveillance of Americans. My sources, Patel continued, are individuals who worked on Lighthouse and became concerned about its legality. They tried to use proper whistleblower channels but were stonewalled. That's why they came to me. And that's why I've refused to identify them, because the same people who ran Lighthouse are still in positions of power and would retaliate against anyone who exposed it. Gardner stood again. Your Honors, Mr. Patel is making unfounded accusations against unnamed government officials. This is precisely why the government insists he must identify his sources, so these allegations can be properly investigated. Judge, Taylor looked skeptical. Or so the sources can be silenced. Gardner looked shocked. The government does not silence legitimate whistleblowers, Your Honor. Recent history suggests otherwise, Doyle interjected. Agent Murphy shifted in her seat, beside John. He could tell she was processing Patel's claims against something she already knew. The FBI's Public Corruption Unit would have visibility into programs like Lighthouse, or at least allegations about them. Mr. Miller, she whispered. I think we should continue our conversation somewhere more private after this. Your access to the Justice Department archives last week suggests you know more about this than you've let on. John nodded slightly. There was no point in denying it now. Maybe it was time to bring the FBI into the loop, assuming Murphy wasn't part of the problem. Back at the witness stand, Patel was continuing his testimony. The officials running Lighthouse knew they were operating in a legal gray area at best. That's why they created a complex paper trail of distribution lists and security protocols to obscure who actually knew what. Judge Howard wasn't the only official whose name was used this way. There were dozens of others who were kept in the dark while their names were used to legitimize the program. Judge Howard's expression remained neutral, but John could see she was connecting dots in her mind. The intimidation attempt, the sign-in sheet left on her car. Someone was trying to silence Patel by forcing her off the case, and they were willing to manipulate evidence to do it. Mr. Patel, Judge Taylor asked, can you provide any proof of these allegations beyond your word and that of anonymous sources? Yes, Your Honor, Patel replied. My attorney has prepared a motion to introduce additional evidence. Documents that my sources provided which corroborate the existence and true nature of Lighthouse. Gardner was on her feet immediately. The government objects to the introduction of any such documents until they can be reviewed for classified content. The documents have already been through a classification review, Doyle countered, approaching the bench with a thick folder. They were cleared for Mr. Patel's book, though the government tried to block their release using dubious national security claims. We have the review letters to prove it. As the judges examined the documents Doyle had presented, the courtroom buzzed with whispers. John used the distraction to speak quietly to Agent Murphy. I need assurances before I talk to you, he said. I need to know you're not part of the Lighthouse oversight team. Murphy looked surprised. I've been investigating public corruption cases for 3 years. Before that, I was in the Baltimore field office working organized crime. I've never been assigned to any intelligence oversight. That's not quite the same as saying you weren't aware of Lighthouse, John pressed. Until today, I'd never heard the name, she replied. But now I'm very interested. Whatever you know, Miller, it would be better to tell me voluntarily than have it come out in a formal investigation. John made his decision. After court adjourns, not here. Up at the bench, the judges finished reviewing the documents and Judge Howard addressed the courtroom. We will take a 30-minute recess to consider the admissibility of these documents. Court is in recess. As people began to file out for the break, Doyle approached Patel at the witness stand. It's working, he said quietly. They're going to have to let the documents in. Patel nodded, and once they're in the record, they can't be unheard, even if the government tries to classify them later. Across the courtroom, Gardner huddled with her team, their expressions grim. The case was slipping away from them. What had started as A straightforward proceeding against Patel for refusing to name his sources had turned into a public airing of a potentially illegal surveillance program. Linda Ortiz looked particularly worried. If those documents are admitted, we're going to have a much bigger problem than Patel. There will be calls for a special prosecutor. Gardner nodded. I need to call the Attorney General. This has gone far beyond our authorization to proceed. As the courtroom emptied, John and Agent Murphy walked out together, maintaining a professional distance. Neither noticed Peter Collins, watching them with interest, or the man in the back row taking photos of them with a small camera. In the judge's private conference room, Judge Howard and Judge Taylor discussed the dramatic turn the case had taken. If Patel's allegations are true, this is far more significant than a source confidentiality issue, Judge Taylor said. This is about government officials deliberately circumventing oversight of a potentially illegal program. Judge Howard nodded, and using my name, and apparently yours as well, to create the illusion of proper supervision. She pointed to a name on one of the distribution lists Doyle had provided. Henry Taylor was listed on a Lighthouse briefing from 2017. I never saw this, Taylor said, frowning at the document. Neither did I see the one with my name. Howard replied, which supports Patel's claim about inflated distribution lists. The question now is how to proceed, Taylor said. These documents appear to have been properly declassified despite the government's objections. Legally, I don't see how we can exclude them. Agreed. But admitting them opens a Pandora's box. This case will no longer be about Patel and his sources. It will be about Lighthouse and who authorized it. Taylor smiled grimly. John Miller and FBI agent Catherine Murphy sat in a small coffee shop 2 blocks from the courthouse. The place was nearly empty, with just a bored barista scrolling on her phone behind the counter. John wrapped his hands around his coffee cup, gathering his thoughts. I need to know something first, he said. What happens to me after I tell you what I know? Murphy studied him carefully. That depends on your level of involvement. If you're just a witness who came across information, not much. If you've broken laws, that's different. But cooperation always counts in your favor. John nodded slowly. I worked for Patel at the Defense Department, that part's true. But I also worked briefly on the Lighthouse program before I realized what it really was. And what was it really? Murphy asked, leaning forward. Exactly what Patel said in court. A domestic surveillance program disguised as foreign intelligence gathering. The targets included journalists, political campaign staff, even judges and members of Congress who were seen as obstacles. Obstacles to what? To certain policy objectives. I never knew exactly who was calling the shots, but it wasn't through the normal chain of command. Lighthouse operated in the shadows with funding channeled through multiple agencies to hide its true scope. Murphy took notes as he spoke. And your role in the current case? John looked down at his coffee. I'm the one who found the memo with Judge Howard's name on it. I've been helping Patel and Doyle build their case. By accessing Justice Department archives under false pretenses? Yes, John admitted. And by providing documents I saved before I left the program. But I never participated in the attempts to intimidate Judge Howard. That wasn't part of the plan I agreed to. Murphy's eyes narrowed. Then whose plan was it? Back at the courthouse, the 30-minute recess was ending. Spectators filed back into the courtroom, including Peter Collins, who had just filed an updated story about the Lighthouse revelations. He noticed that John Miller and the FBI agent hadn't returned, which was interesting in itself. Judges Howard and Taylor returned to the bench. The courtroom fell silent as Judge Howard prepared to speak. After reviewing the documents presented by the defense, we have reached a decision regarding their admissibility, she began. These documents appear to have been properly declassified, despite the government's objections. Therefore, they will be admitted into evidence. Gardner stood up to object, but Judge Howard held up her hand. The prosecution's objection is noted, Ms. Gardner. However, our ruling stands. Judge Taylor spoke next. In light of the serious allegations contained in these documents and in Mr. Patel's testimony, this court is ordering a special investigation into the so-called Lighthouse program. We are also ordering all agencies involved to preserve all related documents immediately. Gardner looked as though she might object again, but instead she sat down and whispered urgently to her assistants. One of them immediately left the courtroom, presumably to notify higher-ups of this development. Judge Howard continued, "Mr. Patel, you will resume your testimony. We want to hear everything you know about Lighthouse, including how these documents came into your possession. However, we are not, at this time, requiring you to identify your sources by name." Doyle could barely contain his smile. This was exactly the outcome they had hoped for. A public hearing about Lighthouse with the documents entered into the official record, all without Patel having to expose his sources. Patel returned to the witness stand. "Thank you, Your Honors. The Lighthouse program began as a legitimate counterintelligence operation in 2016, but by mid-2017, it had evolved into something very different. The initial focus on foreign interference was expanded to include domestic targets with little or no foreign connections." He continued for nearly 30 minutes detailing how the program had operated, how oversight had been deliberately circumvented, and how officials who raised concerns were sidelined or transferred. Throughout his testimony, Gardner remained unusually quiet, only occasionally making objections that were mostly overruled. Outside the courthouse, a black SUV pulled up, and a man in a dark suit got out and rushed inside. 10 minutes later, he slipped into the courtroom and took a seat behind the prosecution table. He passed a note to Gardner, who read it and frowned. After Patel finished his account, Judge Taylor asked, "Mr. Patel, you've presented compelling testimony about potential abuses of power. What do you believe should happen next?" "A full congressional investigation, Your Honor. With public hearings and subpoena power, the American people deserve to know how their privacy rights were violated, and who authorized it." Judge Howard nodded thoughtfully. "Ms. Gardner, does the government wish to cross-examine the witness?" Gardner stood, looking uncomfortable. "Your Honor, in light of the testimony and evidence presented, the government requests a recess to consult with the Department of Justice regarding the direction of this case." Judge Howard raised an eyebrow. "Are you suggesting the government is reconsidering its position?" "I'm suggesting that the scope of this case has expanded beyond my current authorization to proceed," Gardner replied carefully. "Very well. The court will recess until tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. Ms. Gardner, I expect you to have a clear position from the department by then." As the court adjourned, the man in the dark suit approached Gardner. They spoke in hushed tones before leaving together, ignoring the reporters shouting questions. In the coffee shop, Murphy was still questioning John when her phone buzzed with a message. She read it and looked up at John with surprise, the attorney. "General just ordered a full review of the Lighthouse program and all related prosecutions, including the case against Patel," she said. "Something big is happening." John felt a wave of relief wash over him. "They're backing down. They know they can't keep it hidden now that the judges have admitted the documents." "Maybe," Murphy said cautiously. "Or they're regrouping. Don't celebrate yet. People who run programs like Lighthouse don't give up easily." She stood and put on her jacket. "I need to get back to the office, but our conversation isn't over, Mr. Miller. I want a full statement from you on the record about everything you know." "Will I need a lawyer?" John asked. "Probably," she admitted. "But like I said, cooperation counts for a lot." After Murphy left, John sat alone for a few minutes, contemplating what would come next. His phone rang. It was Doyle. "You need to get back to the courthouse now," Doyle said urgently. "Patel wants to talk to you before he meets with the prosecutors. They're offering a deal?" "Looks that way. The AG doesn't want this going to a full congressional investigation. Too many powerful people would be implicated." John hurried back to the courthouse where he found Patel and Doyle in a conference room. "There you are," Patel said when John entered. "We did it. The government is offering to drop all charges against me if I agree not to push for public hearings." "Are you taking the deal?" John asked. Patel exchanged looks with Doyle. "No, we've come too far to settle for a private resolution. The point was always to get Lighthouse exposed publicly." "What about your sources?" John asked. "If this goes to Congress, they'll demand names." By then, it won't matter, Patel replied. Once Congress is involved, the whistleblower protections kick in. My sources will come forward voluntarily under those protections. The next morning, the courtroom was even more crowded than before. Rumors about a possible deal had spread overnight, and everyone wanted to see what would happen. Judges Howard and Taylor took the bench, and Gardner rose to address the court. Your Honors, after consultation with the Department of Justice, the government has decided to dismiss all charges against Mr. Patel. A murmur ran through the courtroom. However, Gardner continued, this dismissal is not an admission regarding the allegations Mr. Patel has made about the so-called Lighthouse program. The government maintains that certain aspects of his testimony involve sensitive national security matters that should not be discussed in open court. Judge Howard leaned forward. Ms. Gardner, is the government attempting to close this matter, quietly to avoid further public scrutiny? Gardner looked uncomfortable. The government believes this resolution serves the interests of justice while protecting legitimate national security concerns. I see, Judge Howard replied. Mr. Doyle, does your client accept this dismissal? Doyle stood. We accept the dismissal of charges, Your Honor, but my client intends to testify before Congress about everything he knows regarding Lighthouse. The dismissal of this case will not silence him. Judge Taylor spoke up. While this court cannot compel congressional action, we will be forwarding all admitted evidence and testimony to the appropriate oversight committees with our strong recommendation for further investigation. Gardner looked as though she might object, but thought better of it. Judge Howard brought down her gavel. The charges against Kash Patel are dismissed. This court is adjourned. As people began to leave, Judge Howard caught John's eye and gave him a slight nod. She knew now what his role had been. Finding the memo, helping to expose Lighthouse. He had manipulated her into a position where she had to confront an uncomfortable truth about government overreach. But in doing so, he had also given her the opportunity to help correct a serious abuse of power. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed around Patel as he made a brief statement.